Welcome back. You're with Al Jazeera. Let's remind you of the top stories now. The Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi has told a Serbian television channel he is staying in Libya. In his latest interview, Gaddafi repeated his claims that foreigners and al-Qaeda are to blame for the unrest across the country. He also said the latest UN sanctions against him are null and void, and he warned he would crush the opposition. Meanwhile, reports from western Libya say troops loyal to Gaddafi are preparing for a counter-offensive in the city of AlJazeera. The city centre is currently in the hands of anti-Gaddafi forces, showing tanks seized by anti-Gaddafi fighters. Now, aides for the Arab League Secretary-General Amr Moussa have confirmed he intends to run for Egyptian president. The Egyptian state news agency made the announcement through its text message service on Sunday. Moussa's office says while he intends to stand, his candidacy won't be official until proposed constitutional changes are enacted. Al Jazeera's Anita McNaught reports from Cairo.
Well, events are moving fast on Egypt's political scene, with the Secretary-General of the Arab League, Amr Moussa, announcing that he will indeed, as had been rumoured, he will now put in and stand for election as President of Egypt. That is after the parliamentary elections have been held. That'll be sometime in the next 6 months. This is a man who's enormously popular in the country. He was the country's most popular foreign minister for 10 years, before then taking the very high-profile position with the Arab League, a man who never lost his ties with his country. And a man who was unable to stand for president until these constitutional changes were made to Egypt's political structure. At the same time as this is going on, we see the announcement of a trial date for the former interior minister, who is perhaps one of the most disliked figures in Hosni Mubarak's cabinet, a man responsible for the police and the prison service. He's being charged with money laundering and squandering of public money, but many Egyptians are asking if there are not many more serious crimes that should be added to the list.
Well, Edward Peck is a long-serving US diplomat who's worked in several African and Middle East countries, including Egypt, and he gave me his view on Amr Moussa.
I have met and worked around with Amr Moussa a number of times over the years. He's a man of intelligence, balance, rationality, experience, thoughtful, and might be exactly the sort of person that many Egyptians would like to have in power, but he has to get there, and they have to go through a process called an election, and no one can predict. They never have been able to in my own country to predict exactly how those elections are going to work out. But Amr Moussa would be a good choice if he's acceptable to the numbers of people that really make a difference. And if he is, that could be a major step if he becomes, the leader towards bringing Egypt around into what we in the West call, the modern democratic world.
Yemen's President Ali Abdullah Saleh has addressed a meeting of his army generals as he tries to shore up his grip on power. The country's been racked by weeks of pro- and anti-government protests. Saleh vowed to defend the unity of Yemen to the last drop of blood. Hashim Albra reports from the capital Sana'a.
Remaining defiant, President Saleh telling his army officers that Yemen is in danger of disintegration and that they should fight for its unity.
We have vowed to defend the republican system, the unity and safety of the republic till the last drop of our blood, and this vow stands now. There is an attempt to split the country into north and south.
The president was referring to his arch rivals, secessionists asking the south to break away from the north, and the Houthi rebels in their ongoing battle against the government for greater autonomy in their region.
This isn't the first time that the president has met his army generals since the start of the crisis in the country. But his statements tell a great deal about his confusion, and it's clear that he has been inspired by Gaddafi's speeches.
But thousands of young Yemenis who have taken to the streets across the country have totally different demands. The departure of the regime. Demands waved off by Saleh's ruling party as illegitimate.
It won't be an Egyptian-style change. It won't be a Tunisian type of change. But unfortunately, if it goes to become very close to what's happening now in Libya, then I don't by any means rule out the possibility of an international and regional intervention here.
For these protesters, Their movement has come a long way, inspired many Yemenis and made sacrifices that calls for dialogue by the government are too late. But if the president is determined to cling to power, the opposition and the anti-government protesters say they will muster more men here in the capital and across the country to put an end to what they describe as an autocratic regime. Hashim Al-Barra, AlJazeera, Sana'a.
An Iranian human rights group says 2 opposition leaders have been moved to a so-called safe house in the capital, Tehran. Mehdi Karoubi and Mir Hossein Mousavi have been under unofficial house arrest since the start of the month. The government blames them for inciting pro-reform protests 2 weeks ago. Iran's former president, Mohammad Khatami, had been calling for their release. India's finance minister is due to unveil his budget to Parliament on Monday. Pranab Mukherjee is expected to announce measures aimed at boosting agricultural productivity. Rising food prices and poor distribution networks have fueled recent protests. Pranash Shuri reports from New Delhi.
United in their demand, women from all over India protesting against rising food prices.
It's getting more difficult to raise our families. Prices of rice, potatoes, onion, everything has gone up. We can't afford to pay this much for the basics.
This anger, simmering for many months, has now spilled onto the streets. Inflation in this country touched 18% last year, and high food prices have hit people right across India. But part of the problem, experts say, lies here. India's agricultural system hasn't been modernized in years, and its farmers are given little incentives. Farmer Satveer Singh prepares his field for the next season's crops. But he says he's received little support from the government.
I work on my fields because it's my life. But I never get fertilizers, power or water on time. This really affects my production.
Those who can sell their produce face another hurdle. While India has enough grain to feed its people, what it lacks is a proper distribution system. Under the current system, stockpiled wheat sits mouldering, sometimes for years. A new system would enable it to get to the people that need it the most during times of high demand. This is where the Indian government stores the grains it buys from its farmers. But as you can see, most of the grains have been lying outside and they've been damaged by the weather. Now, officials here tell me that this produce has been lying here since the past 3 years and they can't sell it to the people outside. And at a time when rising food costs is a big concern for the people in this country, it seems all of this produce is just going to a total waste. Experts say long-needed agricultural reforms are vital if the current hardship is to be eased.
Last agricultural revolution took place in the mid-60s. Now you require a second revolution of building infrastructure to store food grains and be able to deliver them in the same condition in which they were procured. The government has done nothing of that sort.
So while policymakers debate on how best to tackle rising prices, people hope their voice will now force the government to act. Prerna Suri, AlJazeera, New Delhi.
And heavily armed police have broken up a pro-democracy protest in Hong Kong. The activists were responding to an online campaign against the government in major Chinese cities. They tried to plant jasmine outside the Chinese liaison office on Sunday, the flower being symbolic of the uprisings across the Middle East. But police quashed the demonstration, dragging away several people. Iraq's Prime Minister has warned his cabinet to shape up or possibly ship out. Nouri al-Maliki has given certain ministries 100 days to improve their performance. Follows weeks of protests across Iraq by people fed up with poor government services. Now the head of Iraq's parliament is calling for new provincial elections.
I call on the government, the parliament and the Independent Election Commission to conduct elections in the provinces, districts and local councils at the earliest possible date. We will work on revisions to the electoral laws soon. Those for the districts and provinces are ready to be adopted, but those concerning the provinces will need to be revised. We should conduct new elections so that the people can have their say.
Church services have been held in New Zealand for victims of last Tuesday's earthquake. At least 147 people are known to have been killed, but hundreds more are still missing. Andrew Thomas reports from Christchurch.
Sunday, and for the people of Christchurch, a chance to take stock and reflect on the week their city changed forever. Like so many others, this church was damaged in Tuesday's earthquake This service taking place al fresco, with the week's events forefront in everyone's mind.
And that's why the chairs are some distance away from the church, because we're all very much on edge and know that there might be another aftershock that comes along, so we're aware of those dangers as well.
As its name suggests, Christchurch was founded as a Christian city, and despite the fact that many of their church buildings lie in ruins, for some, finding solace on a Sunday is the normal, natural thing to do. It is, if you like, a small slice of the ordinary in extraordinary times. It would take something more than extraordinary for any survivors to be found now beneath Christchurch's rubble. Recovering and identifying bodies has become the principal task. It's a slow process, dreadfully slow for the families of the missing. Every afternoon they arrive for a police briefing, their numbers swelling by the day as grieving relatives from abroad pour in. Christchurch was a big tourist town. People from at least 20 different countries were killed in the quake.
They're overseas, they've received dreadful news, they've had to arrange travel in a haste, and they've come to a part of the country that's quite badly affected by the earthquake. Infrastructure's not necessarily there to support them, and all at a time that they're stressed and de-stressed.
Police have to cope with the darker side of human nature too. There has been a spate of looting of abandoned homes, and frayed nerves have meant reports of domestic violence have spiked. Earthquake scars will forever be a physical feature of modern Christchurch, the emotional trauma taking its toll too. Andrew Thomas, Al Jazeera, Christchurch.
Finally, in just a few hours, the annual Academy Awards will get underway in Hollywood. Outside the Kodak Theatre in Los Angeles, the traditional red carpet is ready for the arrival of A-list film stars. Organisers trying to attract a younger audience this year, with the actors James Franco and Anne Hathaway hosting the Oscars show. Let's get the headlines now here on Al Jazeera. Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi has told a Serbian TV channel he's staying in the country. In his latest interview, he repeated claims that foreigners and al-Qaeda were behind the uprising. And dismissing the UN sanctions against him as null and void, Gaddafi warned he would crush the opposition. Reports from Western Libya say troops loyal to Gaddafi are preparing for a counter-offensive in the city of AlJazeera. The city centre's currently in the hands of anti-Gaddafi forces. These are the latest pictures from the city, just 50 kilometres west of the capital, Tripoli, showing tanks seized by anti-Gaddafi fighters. The rebels have also mounted heavy machine guns on the back of pickup trucks. Fresh fighting has broken out in the Tunisian capital, Tunis. Police fired tear gas and warning shots in the capital to disperse crowds on a third consecutive day of violence. 3 people have been killed and several others wounded in clashes between security forces and demonstrators since Friday. The violence comes as Mohamed Ghannouchi announces he'll step down as Prime Minister. He had planned to guide the country to elections in July after President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali was deposed last month. Former Foreign Minister Beji Caid Sebsi has been appointed in his place. And the crisis in Tunisia has claimed another victim. French Foreign Minister Michel Alliot-Marie has resigned after weeks of pressure over her links to the former president. She flew to Tunisia for a holiday during the unrest in a plane belonging to a businessman linked to Ben Ali. Alliot-Marie also offered French riot police to help quell the unrest. She denied any wrongdoing in her resignation letter. Unrest continues in many parts of the Middle East. At least 2 people have been shot dead by Omani police on Sunday, according to witnesses in Sohar. Tear gas was also used on the demonstrators in the industrial city. At least 1,000 people had gathered, demanding political reform. An Iranian human rights group says 2 opposition leaders have been moved to a so-called safe house in the capital, Tehran. Mehdi Karoubi and Mir Hossein Mousavi have been under unofficial house arrest since the start of the month. The government blames them for inciting pro-reform protests 2 weeks ago. Iran's former president, Mohammad Khatami, had been calling for their release. I'll be back at the top of the hour for more news. Coming up next, across the Shouting Valley.
If you're a Nokia user, you can download Al Jazeera's news widget from Nokia's Ovis store. The news widget